70% of the surface of the Earth is covered in water. It is separated into numerous biomes distinguished by various regions and zones, which are distinguished by several biotic and abiotic characteristics. An organism's environment has both physical and biological components. The abiotic components include temperature, precipitation, wind, and sunlight. The biotic components consist of other members of the organism's own species, as well as individuals of other species. Most salmon begin their lives in streams, travel to the ocean to feed and grow, then return to their natal streams to mate and die. So salmon migrate between a freshwater aquatic biome of a stream and also a marine aquatic biome in the ocean. Just as on land, humans are affecting aquatic biomes worldwide by causing both direct and indirect effects. Humans cause physical changes to aquatic ecosystems by filling or draining wetlands, damming streams, and removing water from ponds and rivers for agricultural irrigation. Humans also cause biological changes by transporting organisms such as the invasive zebra mussel, which has become a scourge on the Great Lakes of North America and other regions of the world. Humans overexploit marine resources, like top predators such as tuna and sharks, causing cascading effects on food webs. Global climate change influences aquatic ecosystems by the same mechanisms discussed for terrestrial ecosystems. In addition, increased atmospheric CO2 is causing waterways to become more acidic, limiting the ability of organisms like coral to build skeletons and having other far-reaching effects. The major abiotic factors that distinguish streams from oceans include salinity and nutrient availability, water depth, and water flow. Water is an excellent solvent, one reason why it is so essential to life. The water in clouds is nearly pure, but as rainwater percolates through soils and flows across rocks, it picks up solutes. The fresh water of ponds, lakes, and rivers has very low solute concentrations. However, as this fresh water steadily flows into the ocean, it continually adds solutes. Over millions of years, this process has resulted in a relatively high concentration of solutes in seawater. The proportion of solutes dissolved in water determines its salinity, generally measured as the number of grams of solutes per kilogram of water, a unitless number described as parts per thousand. The salinity of freshwater varies from 0.06 to 0.3 parts per thousand, while salinity of the ocean is usually 35 parts per thousand. Solutes with a positive charge like sodium, potassium, magnesium, and calcium combine with solutes with a negative charge like chlorine, bromine, and fluorine to form salts. The concentration of different salts in the ocean is determined by their solubility in water. For example, calcium carbonate has a low solubility in water, so it precipitates as limestone at the bottom of the ocean. But sodium chloride, like table salt, has such a high solubility in water that it makes up about 86% of sea salt. Salinity has dramatic effects on osmosis and water balance in organisms. Species have physiological adaptations that allow them to cope with a specific range of salinity. Thus, salinity is a major determinant of the distribution of organisms in aquatic biomes. Water absorbs and scatters light, so amount and types of wavelengths available to organisms change as water depth increases. At the water surface, all wavelengths of light are equally available. Ocean water dramatically removes light in the red region of the visible spectrum, resulting in the familiar blue hue of underwater scenes. This is important because wavelengths in the red region are unavailable for photosynthesis underwater. Despite the high absorption peaks for red wavelengths in key photosynthetic pigments like chlorophyll, the quantity of light available to organisms also diminishes rapidly with increasing depth. In pure seawater, the total amount of light available at a depth of 10 meters is less than 40% of what it is at the surface. Virtually no light reaches depths greater than 40 meters. Seawater is rarely pure and may contain high concentrations of algae, sediments, and other light-reducing components. The turbidity, or cloudiness of water, is an important determinant of light penetration. Turbidity is sometimes caused by natural processes such as erosion of river sediments by floodwaters and the erosion of coastal sediments by wave action. Turbidity is also caused by human activities, such as runoff from agricultural fields and algae blooms caused by nutrient pollution. Light availability also has a major influence on productivity. Organisms living in fast-flowing streams must cope with physical forces of the water, which constantly threatens to move them. Stream-dwelling organisms like mayfly larvae have streamlined shapes and behaviors that help maintain their position in the stream. Marine organisms that live in intertidal regions are also exposed to water flow, sometimes to violent wave action during storms and to tidal currents. Biomechanics studies the mechanical implications of water flow to the physiology, evolution, and ecology of aquatic organisms. Water flow can also influence non-mechanical aspects of the abiotic environment, including the availability of oxygen, light, and nutrients. For example, the fast-moving water near the source of streams tends to be high in O2 and low in nutrients. The slower-flowing water downstream tends to be lower in O2 and more nutrient-rich. Water movement is critical in aquatic ecosystems because it can literally sweep organisms away. In many aquatic ecosystems, nutrients such as nitrogen and phosphorus are in short supply. If water's moving, such as in a small salmon stream, nutrients tend to be washed away. If the water is still, nutrients tend to fall to the bottom and collect in the form of debris. The scarcity of nutrients limits growth rates in photosynthetic organisms that provide food for other species. Upwelling and turnover are mechanisms that can bring nutrients from the bottom up to the water's surface. In the oceans, nutrients in the sunlit surface waters are constantly lost in the form of dead organisms that rain down into the depths. In coastal regions of the world's oceans, however, nutrients are brought up to the surface by currents that cause upwellings. Because the Earth rotates constantly, this wind-driven water current is slowly moved offshore. As the surface water moves away from the coast, it is steadily replaced by water moving up from the ocean bottom. The upwelling water is nutrient-rich. In effect, it recycles nutrients that earlier had fallen to the ocean floor. The nutrients support luxuriant growths of photosynthetic cells, which feed an array of small grazing animals, which in turn feed small fish called anchoveta. When currents are favorable and upwelling is steady, the anchoveta fishery is the most productive in the world. Because they were scored by glaciers as recently as 10,000 years ago, the higher latitudes of the world host many lakes. Each year, these bodies of water undergo remarkable changes known as the spring and fall turnovers. The spring and fall lake turnovers occur in response to changes in air temperature. Note that in winter, water stratifies, and at the surface of a northern lake, it's locked up in ice at a temperature of 0 degrees C. The water just under the ice is slightly warmer and relatively oxygen-rich because it was exposed to atmosphere as winter set in. Because water is densest at 4 degrees C, the water at the bottom of the lake is at 4 to 5 degrees C because it sank to the bottom, being dense. The bottom water is oxygen poor because organisms that decompose the falling organic material use up available oxygen. A stratified gradient in temperature such as this is called a thermocline. The ice begins to melt, however, and when spring arrives, the temperature of the water on the surface rises until it reaches 4 degrees C. The water at the surface of the lake is now heavier than the water below it. So, water on the surface sinks. Water at the bottom of the lake is displaced and comes to the surface, completing the spring turnover. During the spring turnover, water at the bottom of the lake carries sediments and nutrients from the bottom up to the surface. This flush of nutrients triggers increase in the growth of photosynthetic algae and bacteria Biologists call it the spring bloom. The lake then stratifies again in summer. The surface water in winter and summer is oxygen rich, while the water at the bottom is nutrient rich. When temperatures cool in the fall, the water at the surface reaches a temperature of 4 degrees C and sinks, displacing water at the bottom and creating the fall turnover. The fall turnover is important because it brings oxygen-rich water from the surface down to the bottom, and because it, again, brings nutrients from the bottom up to the sunlit surface waters. Without the spring and fall turnovers, most freshwater nutrients would remain on the bottom of lakes. These aquatic ecosystems will be much less productive as a result.